I'm just going to give it one more minute. Hello, everyone, and then we'll get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We still have some people coming in, but I'll start the announcements. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's National NAGPRA Program webinar. My name is Kate Compton-Gore, and I'm the training coordinator at the National NAGPRA Program. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. A recording of this webinar will be made available on our website after the meeting, along with copies of the PowerPoint presentation. Your name and attendance at this webinar will also be recorded. If you wish to not have your name or attendance recorded, you may disconnect at this time. After the presentation, we will turn on the question and answer option where you may submit questions for live responses. Given the size of these webinars, we ask that you not raise your hand or ask questions throughout the presentation. We prefer all questions come through the Q&A in written form. The chat feature is also disabled. Melanie O'Brien, the National NAGPRA Program Manager, and other members of our team will be available to assist with the Q&A at the end. This is the last webinar in our series for the year, but stay tuned for information on our upcoming webinars for 2026. Please keep in mind that we will be moving from the Zoom webinar platform to Teams webinars, and more information will be announced soon. I have a couple of announcements. The next NAGPRA Review Committee meeting will be on September 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern. If you are interested in attending, please register for this meeting on our events page, and we will put that in the Q&A. Second, the Association on American Indian Affairs has asked that we remind everyone about the resources the association provides for Native nations. This includes the Tribal Partner Working Group, which is a closed working group for Native nations by Native nations that meets every fourth Thursday of the month to discuss cultural sovereignty, NAGPRA, and tackle current issues as a coalition, such as land claims, federal acknowledgement, and other issues facing Native nations. They are working on a NAGPRA curriculum that will include in-person and virtual training, and it will be free for all Native Nation representatives. Additionally, there is an international repatriation guide and program that are available on the association website. And I'll ask a member of AAIA to please put those links in the chat at the end, or excuse me, in the Q&A at the end. And the association provides information on private returns, including helping with returns from private collectors to Native nations. Please visit the website for the Association on American Indian Affairs for more information. Okay, let's get started. Today's webinar is NAGPRA Resources for Lineal Descendants, Indian Tribes, and Native Hawaiian Organizations. And I am pleased to introduce our three NAGPRA Fellows, Audrey Andrews, Tanner Barney, and Shayla Charlie, who will be presenting this webinar today. And Audrey, I will turn it to you.
Hello, can everyone see my screen? Thank you. Again, today's presentation is titled NAGPRA Resources for Lineal Descendants, Indian Tribes, and NHOs. Hi everyone, my name is Audrey Andrews and I am a National NAGPRA Program Fellow. Today I will discuss highlights of the NAGPRA regulations for lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs. Each slide contains a segment of the regulations. I will read the regulations verbatim to demonstrate their accessibility. I know you may think it's boring or too complicated to read the regulations themselves, but anyone and everyone is completely capable of reading and comprehending these regulations. Melanie O'Brien always says that the best NAGPRA training is reading the regulations themselves, so that is exactly what I am going to do. After reading the applicable section of the regulations, I will discuss how that section may be utilized by lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs in consultations and conversations with museums and federal agencies. Based on feedback from this webinar, we will produce a document to serve as a quick reference guide for lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs. I also want to stress that you are always encouraged to reach out to the National NAGPRA program at nagpra_info@nps.gov with any questions you may have. We are here to help, so please email us. Again, I do strongly encourage you to read the full regulations in 43 CFR Part 10. But for now, let's get started with a few highlights. First up is deference to Native American traditional knowledge. According to 10.1A3, these regulations require deference to the Native American traditional knowledge of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs. What this means in practice is that museums and federal agencies must consider Native American traditional knowledge in their decision-making processes regarding NAGPRA. Other forms of knowledge, such as archaeological or ethnographic epistemologies, may not be privileged. If a museum or federal agency is pushing back against the use of Native American traditional knowledge, you may wish to remind them of 10.1A3 and that, according to NAGPRA, traditional knowledge holds equal weight to any archaeological report. Next up is duty of care. These regulations are over 2 slides because they're a little bit longer. So according to 10.1D, museums and federal agencies must consult with lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs on the appropriate storage, treatment, or handling of human remains or cultural items. They must make a reasonable and good faith effort to incorporate and accommodate the Native American traditional knowledge of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs in the storage, treatment, or handling of human remains or cultural items. And they must obtain free, prior, and informed consent from lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs prior to allowing any exhibition of, access to, or research on human remains or cultural items. Research includes, but is not limited to, any study, analysis, examination, or other means of acquiring or preserving information about human remains or cultural items. Research of any kind on human remains or cultural items is not required by the Act or these regulations. The duty of care regulations are a great example of how accessible these regulations are, and it really means exactly what it says. But to reiterate, in practice, museums and federal agencies must consult regarding the appropriate care and treatment of any human remains or cultural items in their possession or control or custody. Human remains and cultural items may not be exhibited without consent. So, if a museum or federal agency wishes to conduct research on or display human remains or cultural items to which you are culturally affiliated, you may wish to remind them of their duty of care requirements per 10.1D. Next, we're going to discuss right of possession. According to 10.2, right of possession means possession or control obtained with the voluntary consent of a person or group that had the authority of alienation. Right of possession is given through the original acquisition of an unassociated funerary object, a sacred object, or an object of cultural patrimony from an Indian tribe or NHO with the voluntary consent of a person or group with the authority to alienate the object, or human remains or associated funerary objects which were exhumed, removed, or otherwise obtained with the full knowledge and consent of the next of kin, or when no next of kin is ascertainable, the official governing body of the appropriate Indian tribe or Native Hawaiian organization. What this means. Museums and federal agencies must prove they have a right of possession. To rephrase that, the burden of proving right of possession rests with museums and federal agencies, not with lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs. The sale or gifting of a cultural item does not equate to right of possession. This is addressed in Final Rule Comment 105, which I encourage everyone to read. For example, if a pipe was gifted or sold under duress, the museum or federal agency does not have a right of possession. Importantly, right of possession is determined by the original acquisition of an object. So, if donor Bob, for example, purchased an object and later donated it to a museum, the right of possession rests on donor Bob's purchasing of the object, not on their later donation of this object to a museum. In this example, it does not matter that the museum acquired the object through donor Bob's free and informed donation. Instead, the museum must look to donor Bob's purchasing of the object to understand if they have a right of possession today. Again, if this object was sold to donor Bob under duress, the museum would not have a right of possession. When a lineal descendant, Indian tribe, or NHO submits a request for repatriation, they must include an assertion that the institution with possession or control does not have right of possession. Again, once that assertion has been made, it is the responsibility of the museum or federal agency to overcome that assertion and prove their right of possession. So when a museum or a federal agency says they have a right of possession, they very well might. However, this assertion should generally be a red flag for requesters. The requester may wish to have a conversation with the museum about what right of possession really means to determine if a museum is appropriately and accurately applying this language. Next up is repatriation. According to 10.2, repatriation means a museum or federal agency relinquishes possession or control of human remains or cultural items in a holding or collection to a lineal descendant, Indian tribe, or NHO. What this means in practice. Lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs may not be required to sign a repatriation statement. I'll say that again, that lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs may not be required to sign a repatriation statement. Lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs do not have to answer questions about what will happen post-repatriation, including questions about reburial, curation, or exhibition. Lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs do not have to take physical custody of human remains and/or cultural items to complete repatriation. And most importantly, museum policies do not trump federal law. Let me repeat that. Museum policies do not trump federal law. So if a museum states, for example, that you must sign a repatriation statement because it's just their policy, you may wish to remind them that federal law comes first. This also applies to any timelines that a museum may have regarding deaccessioning. In the end, they must adhere to NAGPRA. Last, I'd like to talk briefly about allegations. Any person may file an allegation of failure to comply by sending a written allegation, to the manager of the National NAGPRA program. Each allegation must include the name and contact information of the person alleging the failure to comply. It must identify the specific provisions of the act or the subpart that the museum is alleged to have violated, and it may enumerate separate violations alleged. The number of separate violations is determined by factors like the number of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs determined to be aggrieved, or the number of individuals, or the number of funerary objects, sacred objects, or objects of cultural patrimony involved in the failure to comply. It also may include information showing that the museum has possession or control, and it may include information showing that the museum receives federal funds. What this means in practice is that anyone may submit an allegation of failure to comply to the National NAGPRA Program Manager at nagpra_info@nps.gov. The National NAGPRA program will not commence an investigation of this sort without a written allegation of a failure to comply. This is so as not to interfere with ongoing consultations between museums and lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHOs. In other words, if you would like the National NAGPRA program to investigate something, you must explicitly state this. An investigation of this nature is not something that the National NAGPRA program will independently commence. So as a reminder, we would love to develop a quick reference guide for lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and NHOs to be available on the National NAGPRA program website. If you have any thoughts or feedback about this portion of the presentation, please email us at nagpra_info@nps.gov. This is the conclusion of my portion of today's presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I hope this allowed you to see how capable you and everybody is of reading and understanding these regulations yourselves. For now, I'm going to pass it over to Tanner Barney.
Ayuki Kawada, Nanithwaiti Tanner Barney, Naum Kurukwa Adad. Hello everyone, my name is Tanner Barney. I'm Karuk, Upriver people of Northern California, and I'm a fellow of the National NAGPRA program. And today I'm going to be talking to you about our internal and external databases, how to get to them, and how to navigate through them or request information from the National NAGPRA program. The first suggestion that I have is instead of navigating our website, which will be going through some inevitable changes as the year goes on, I recommend Googling, or in this case, Binging, NAGPRA Databases, and it should be the first link that pops up after your AI overview. And when you click that link, it will bring you to this databases page, and it will show you all the databases we have available. Today, we're going to be going through inventories, summaries, notices in the Federal Register, and NAGPRA contacts. The only two databases we're not going to go through today will be notices in newspapers and the unclaimed list. And the reason why, although that data is complete, the way in which we convey that information is a work in progress. So stay tuned to those pages in the coming year and relatively soon as well. Prior to digging into the databases themselves and how they interact with one another, I want to talk about how to use them. You will notice that in all of the database pages, they all have these buttons on the top left-hand corner and on the right-hand side. These top left corner buttons are used to majorly chunk your information into more manageable amounts. So you will see here that we have 25 entries shown, and we have a total of 12,399 entries, along with 496 pages. And I think we can all agree that that's a little unruly. So in this case, we have all human remains culturally affiliated and not culturally affiliated human remains. And in the effort of explaining how databases work, we need to use some data. So I'm going to select not culturally affiliated. And my example for today is going to be University of California, Berkeley. So as you can see, I've selected not culturally affiliated human remains. I've categorized by UC Berkeley. I scroll down, and now we have a total of 258 entries and only 11 pages, a little more usable. These buttons on the right-hand side can be pretty useful for you. If you click copy, it'll just copy 25 rows to the clipboard, and as you can see, it only copies the first 25. So I have 25 entries being shown here. But if I click all, and then I click copy, it copies all 258 rows to the clipboard. So now you can take that information, you can paste it into an Excel spreadsheet, a Google Sheets spreadsheet, whichever form you would like to work with it in. The only thing I would recommend is not pasting it into a Word document. I've noticed that when I've done it, it'll just it'll be fine for the first couple rows, but a little bit of jumbling further on, and it just gets worse the longer the document. So Excel and Google Sheets are my two go-tos. You can also export it into a CSV, Excel, or PDF. If you were to export it into a PDF file, it would come out looking something like this. And if you were to put it into an Excel spreadsheet, here's this for you as well. And you'll notice that the PDFs and the Excel spreadsheets are case sensitive as well, meaning that it only has provided the first 25 entries. So if you want to include all of them, make sure you are selecting this button here and showing all entries are available. One more thing to note is the search bar over here. The search bar is case sensitive and it can pretty much look up anything that you're looking for. So if I wanted to look for Lassen County, it'll show me everything available in Lassen County over here. And if I just decide to search the number 13, it'll show me 13 individuals, 13 funerary objects, or numbers beginning with 13 if you're looking for something that specific. The last thing to note on these columns is you can categorize, if they're alphabetical in nature, you can categorize from A to Z or Z to A, and numerical 0 to however much you're looking for, or the highest to low. Low to high, high to low. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so this is the notices database, and I'm just going to read straight from our dialogue here. This table is an abstract of the information submitted by museums and federal agencies showing the number of individuals and associated associated funerary objects that have been reported in inventories and are still pending consultation or public notice prior to repatriation. So still pending consultation and or public notice. These databases are here to they're here for tribes to track progress. So all of the information you see in this inventories database are inventories and inventory records that are not currently in notices. If they're not in notices, they're not repatriated. So if they are in here, they have not been repatriated, not in notices. If you saw something in here and you notice that that entry is gone, it's not just disappeared into our void of data, although we have quite a lot of it. It has just been put into a notice, and then it is moved, that information is moved into our notices database, and you can ask for more information upon request, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. This is our summaries database. Again, I will read straight from our given dialogue here. This table is an abstract of the information submitted by museums and federal agencies showing the received date and the name of each Indian tribe or NHO that should have received a copy of the summary. So here we have Museum or Federal Agency, received date, Indian tribe, or NHO. One thing I find pretty useful about these databases is, let's say I go to received date, and we're looking at low to high here. The earliest one we have is from June 3rd of 1993. Over time, and I don't mean to age anybody with this, but 1993 it's been a while. This is an old summary, I would say. And over time, over like these 30 years, tribes, federal agencies, museum staff, they're bound to go through staff changes, right? And so it's only natural that things will get lost in the cracks. And so if I am, for this instance right here, Karuk tribe, if I am my tribe's TIPO and I see, oh, there's a summary in here from 7/12/1993, I can't seem to find any records on that. Well, why don't I just go ahead and reach out to, in this case, Klamath National Forest and see if they have any updates on that. If they can't provide me with anything, how about I, ask the National NAGPRA program at their info box and see if they have any information on it there as well. Moving into our notices database, this table shows the museum or federal agency submitting the notice, the date of publication, and the related statement, a link to a published notice, and the total number of human remains or cultural items identified in the notice. So as you can see, we have the museum or federal agency, the published date, and the statement date. And I mentioned before that these databases are meant for tribes to track progress. And this statement date column is really important. So you had, for instance, I'm going to use inventories here. So I'm looking for notices of inventory completion. If you were looking for summaries, you navigate to notices of intended repatriation. So let's say there was an inventory record in here. It was put into a notice. It is then published in the Federal Register. And the published date is on the left-hand side here. Federal Register link is under the link column. And then let's say a repatriation statement comes to National NAGPRA regarding that published date, and that is where the statement date is entered. So when we get a repatriation statement regarding an inventory, or I'm sorry, regarding a notice, it is then entered and it is updated in this database here. See if we can find one of the more recent ones, looking at April 26th of 2024. So this is all post new regulations. Now, finally, I mentioned summaries database about getting a hold of a couple of folks if you need to contact someone, and that is what our contacts database is for. This database is all self-served, I guess. What I mean by that is all the information that you find in here has been produced and provided to us by the federal agencies and tribes or museums to list their contact information on our website. So if you are looking through this database and you don't see yourself and you want to be here in case, what if somebody's looking for me, if I need to get a hold of, or if somebody needs to get a hold of me, how can they do that? Google or search yourself in here. If you can't find yourself, send your information to the National NAGPRA program. We will have your information in there within 5 minutes tops. It's a really quick process, and that way the people who need to get a hold of you can. Continuing with my example here, if I were looking to get a hold of Berkeley, I would select University of California, Berkeley from the list. As you can see, Alex Lucas comes up along with the title and the phone number provided there. But if you're not, I guess my generation tends to be a little more anxious when it comes to phone calls. We don't really want to make phone calls. I'd rather write an email, right? So all you have to do is you have to click this drop-down menu here, and the email is provided for you right there. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is going to be our internal database and what we can provide you. If you reach out to us and you say, hey, I want information on this, this, and this. So this is what our internal database looks like. And let's say you're looking for inventory records. And again, following our example here, we're going to use Berkeley. And all I'm explaining right here is coding. You don't have to worry about knowing what this looks like or how to use these functions. I'm just showing you our process here. And let's say we're going to look for in notices false. So in this case, we're looking for inventory records from UC Berkeley that are not in notices. And deactivated, we will move to false as well. And deactivated, all that means sometimes a museum will go through a consolidation process and move multiple records together. This is just, so like these old records would get deactivated. When we still have like the record for that deactivated record, which I know sounds confusing, it's really a record for the record. So it just shows that there was a process that this has moved along, and we're just omitting those because those are currently empty. Down here, we have some more items of information. Depending on what you ask for, we can deselect or select as necessary from this list. So we're going to click search here, and you will notice that there is showing 1 to 25 of 258 entries, which corresponds exactly with, if I change this to 25, oops, there we go. 1 to 25 of 258 entries. So the information that you're seeing on the forward-facing database is the same in the internal database. There's just some things that are behind our database as needed. So like if you were to reach out, you would get this information, you would get site names, collection IDs, and things like that. So if you did want to contact Berkeley and you say, hey, I'm looking for this inventory record that corresponds to this site name and the collection ID, it is here for you. And now when we prepare this to send it to you, we will scroll down and click export to Excel, and that will spit out an Excel spreadsheet. We will make sure everything looks clean and good to go and send it your way, on your way for you to use. So yeah, that's all I have to discuss today about inventories and not inventories, I'm sorry, databases. Inventories is a part of that. And I'm going to pass this on to Shayla Charlie to talk about grants. Thank you.
Yate she'e Sheila Tate Nishe, she'e Ashihe Nishle, do Tisna Jini Bashichin. Hello everyone, my name is Shayla Charlie, and I am a member of the Navajo Nation. I am also a national NAGPRA grant, or a national NAGPRA fellow. So I'm very happy to be here with everyone today. And today I'm going to talk about NAGPRA grants. So the overall NAGPRA grant goals is to assist program or projects that successfully further the NAGPRA compliance process, as well as support the repatriation to Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations, also known as NHOs. On this next presentation, I will provide eligible applicants who can apply to these NAGPRA grants. This includes federally recognized tribes, also including Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiian Organizations, as well as museums as defined by NAGPRA. This includes institutions receiving federal funds and holding Native American human remains or cultural items. I would also like to note that any eligible applicants, such as for Lineal Descendants, who would like to apply to these grants must work with a federally recognized tribe or NHO for funding support. Under the NAGPRA program, there are two types of grants provided. The first is the consultation and documentation grant. This pretty much covers any consultation efforts between tribes and museums, as well as supporting documentations leading to the repatriation of Native American cultural items, including human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, as well as objects of cultural patrimony. The second grant is repatriation grants. This helps defray costs associated with packaging, transportation, as well as contamination removals, as well as reburial and temporary storage of NAGPRA-related human remains and or cultural items. Here's a list of eligibility requirements for the consultation and documentation grants. One of the requirements for this grant is museums must meet NAGPRA compliance. So this includes a NAGPRA summary of cultural items, as well as a NAGPRA inventory of human remains and AFOs, also known as associated funerary objects. And an additional note I would like to mention is that museums must complete these documents before submission, and museums out of compliance with NAGPRA may be excluded. I would also like to note that federal agencies and Smithsonian institutes cannot apply to these grants. On this next slide, I provided a list of eligible activities under the consultation and documentation grant. The first activity is research and data collection. So this includes conducting consultations with tribes and NHOs about cultural items to understand their origins and who they belong to, as well as updating NAGPRA inventory, responding to items requests in the NAGPRA summary, and determining the geographical origin, cultural affiliation surrounding the acquisitions of Native American cultural items. As for the second activity, this includes training. This includes activities that are focused on teaching people about NAGPRA rules, as well as on how to handle properly cultural items. The third activity is travel. So this includes funding for trips to meet with tribal representatives or other staffs to discuss NAGPRA items in person. The fourth activity includes meetings, often referring to organizing gatherings, whether in person or online, to talk about the important issues relating to NAGPRA. The last activity is collection care and duty of care. So this means taking responsibility for the proper handling, storage, and preservations of cultural items. On this next slide, I am going to provide an overview of the fiscal 2025 consultation and documentation grant information. So this grant is competitive, and the deadline for this grant was March 31st, 2025. So although the notice of funding for this grant has passed, it's always, I thought it was always important to cover this information. And the amount award for this grant is $5,000 to $150,000. On this next slide, I am going to provide eligibility requirements for the repatriation grants. So one of the requirements for this grant is that eligible applicants must be in NAGPRA compliance. And this includes a published notice of inventory completion, as well as an intent to repatriate in the Federal Register. The next is the required 30-day waiting period that must pass, and an included repatriation statement as well. On this next slide, I provided a list of eligible activities under the repatriation grant. So this also includes travel, which involves representatives from Indian tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and museums to help prepare or accompany Native American remains and or cultural items to their home tribes or organizations. The second eligible activity is transportation. which involves the moving of Native American human remains and or cultural items to the appropriate Indian tribe or Native Hawaiian organization. As for the third activity, this involves testing and decontamination. So this essentially is checking for hazardous substances, documentations, and decontamination of Native American human remains and or cultural items. As for the fourth activity, this involves the constructions of appropriate containers. So building secure containers for safely transporting and storing repatriated human remains and cultural items. The fifth activity is ceremonial materials. So special items needed for traditional ceremonies to respectfully return human remains and cultural items. As for the last activity, this involves staff time, so hours spent by staff organizing and managing all details involving the return of items. And this next slide, I'm going to provide an overview of the fiscal 2025 repatriation grant information. So this is a non-competitive grant. The deadline for this grant is May 8, 2026, and the amount award for this grant is $1,000 to $25,000. In this next slide, I also provided a list of non-eligible grant activities. So this includes fundraising. This is associated with activities aimed at promoting a cause or raising funds, as well as capital projects, buildings, or construction-related initiatives. Federal agencies, foreign institutions, and Smithsonian institutions are not eligible for these grants. As well as any non-NAGPRA collections, and as well as certain reburial costs. In this next slide, I provided a screenshot of mandatory forms and documents for the package application. So the first mandatory form is an application for federal assistance, as well as a budget information for non-construction programs, an assurance for non-construction programs, as well as a project narrative attachment, as well as a project abstract summary and a budget narrative attachment forms, and any other additional attachment forms. Moving forward, I want to provide additional information for eligible applicants, so anyone interested can view and download their current NOFO and application forms on grants.gov. If you search up NAGPRA and the keyword, you're able to find this funding opportunity. It's also important that applicants must submit their complete application packages electronically through grants.gov. So that concludes the rest of the presentations. If you have any questions or would like more information, please do not hesitate to reach out at NAGPRA_info@nps.gov. And if you have any questions about grants, please reach out to Angelina Pearson. I've also provided her email below is at NAGPRA_grants@nps.org. And thank you so much.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Audrey, Tanner, and Shayla. I really appreciate that information. So now we're going to open up the Q&A. So we encourage you all to put your answers here in written form, and you can like them to bring them to the top. And I will begin reading questions as they come in, and I will forward them to the appropriate member of our team to answer. Oh, thank you. Audrey just put the link to the review committee meeting registration in the chat. And you can also, if you want to put any information in the Q&A for other links. And yes, there will be a copy of the slides provided along with a recording of the webinar that will be on our website. Okay. See, the first question, would you please share the links to the forms shared in the last presentation? For the grants, if you're the last presentation on grants, yes, we can put some of those links in for grants. Okay, next question. During Audrey's presentation, she stated that Indian tribes, lineal descendants, and NHOs do not need to take physical possession of the remains to complete repatriation. Can you explain this and what this means for federal agencies and museums? Are the federal agencies and museums required to continue housing and caring for the remains on behalf of tribes, lineal descendants, and NHOs?
I can take that. And then if you want to add anything, Kate or Melanie. This is a great question and why I wanted to cover the definition of repatriation. Repatriation is about possession or control. So when you repatriate something, that those human remains or cultural items are no longer in that museum's or federal agency's possession or control. That does not necessarily mean that they are not in that museum or federal agency's custody. So we have multiple examples of something being repatriated, but the lineal descendant, Indian tribe, or NHO may choose to continue allowing the museum or federal agency to have custody of the human remains or cultural items, to care for them. So repatriation is about possession or control, not about custody. But that's something that would be determined with consulting parties, right? Or with the requester, I should say, with the lineal descendant, Indian tribe, or NHO, who is then in possession or control of those human remains or cultural items. Would you add anything, Kate?
No, we get this question a lot because some institutions consider repatriation to be the physical transfer. So just like Audrey explained, it's not, it doesn't have to include physical transfer. And if you have additional questions on that, please reach out to us for more explanation. But this does come up a lot. And so that was one of the reasons why we included that definition of repatriation today. Let's see. Going down the list, how can NPS tribal liaisons better serve lineal descendants in the process of repatriation? This is a question I might pass over to Melanie, please.
Hi, everybody. This is a difficult question for us to answer. I think from our perspective at the National NAGPRA program, lineal descendants have rights and abilities to exercise those rights through the NAGPRA process. I think that there are probably great examples of how tribes have supported or assisted lineal descendants. I guess the question is actually asking about whether National Park Service tribal liaisons, meaning the federal government, can better serve lineal descendants in the process. I think any federal agency or museum, so National Park Service or not, has an obligation to ensure that they are identifying lineal descendants if possible. And the best way to support that process is, of course, to be using all the information that you have available. Certainly, there are any number of ways that lineal descendants might engage in the NAGPRA process and could be supported. I think that's as specific as I can get. Might be something to explore more through the communities of practice to see how other people have similarly approached that question.
Thank you, Melanie. Let's see, this next question, it looks like for Tanner. Can you search the inventories in the Federal Register for a particular type of item you're concerned may fall under NAGPRA to see if anything like it has been repatriated?
I was actually thinking about passing this on to Melanie as well to see if she had any experience with it. I've seen a couple of things like where I've been able to like make a quick search and find what I'm looking for, but I personally think that the Federal Register search function is pretty bad. And so it can be really hard to try to find something as simple as like, I'm looking for this item and it'll pull up with like a whole bunch of other things and there's a filtering system. So Melanie, do you have anything to add to that to see if you're looking for a particular type of item? I think another thing too, when looking at notices or inventories, not everything is laid out specifically. Some tribes will ask that information be, kept confidential, and so it won't be as specific as listing the items.
Yeah, I think this is, Tanner, an opportunity for me to turn the tables on your 1993 being a long time ago, because back in 1993, we had to do a lot more work to figure out how to do research and craft search terms before we had full text search capabilities. So some of the searching the Federal Register comes down to crafting a good search. And, you know, a couple of tips that I have for, if you go to federalregister.gov, in that search bar, it'll do a text search of everything. And Tanner's right. It'll turn back a lot of things that you're not looking for. So a couple ways to narrow it. One, always put NAGPRA in as the first search term. I will tell you that that will exclude some old notices. So some of the notices from 1993 don't include the acronym NAGPRA. But it's a good way to at least start the filtering process. Another way to filter is if you can be specific as to a location, that can sometimes yield a better result. So instead of looking for a particular type of item, if you know the location the item came from by county, that can sometimes get you narrowed in to the right notice. But other descriptive or distinctive features can help. I know that I've had more success in looking for something like, say, an item that included eagle feathers. You know, that gets pretty narrow. Of course, those are also more limited. But there are any number of ways that you can try to narrow in that text searching, but really it comes down to what information's in the notice to begin with and whether or not you're going to be able to find that notice in an efficient way. I will say that if, just going back to the question, right? Instead of searching the Federal Register to see if a particular type of item you're concerned with may fall under NAGPRA, the best way to answer that question quickly is through consultation.
Okay, thank you. Tanner, did you want to add anything else? Okay. Going to the next question. Okay. Audrey, I might turn this one over to you. Are the inventories that NIC are based on available?
Yes, those are available both in the database that Tanner, well, I guess they would be removed from the database that Tanner shared. That's where they would have been originally. Once they're in an NIC, you can email us or the institution with possession or control for that information. But if you just send an email to NAGPRA_info@nps.gov, we have all of those inventories on record.
Thank you. I also just want to mention that there is information for the Tribal Partner Working Group in the answered questions, which I believe everybody can see. Okay, moving to the next question. Can you clarify whether non-federal museums are eligible for NAGPRA grants when working with federal collections in their custody, such as preparing ancestors and belongings for repatriation? Looks like Audrey answered. Okay, Audrey, yes, please take this question.
I was just marking it off. I don't know the answer to this.
Okay, I have a bit of the answer, but I think I might pass this to Melanie for a little extra help.
Sure thing. Happy to help. This one is a little sticky. So museums, when it comes to museums applying for grants related to federal collections, there are pretty much the answer is no. It is the federal agency's obligation to pay for the cost of consultation and any inventory or summary work that needs to be done on that collection. The museum cannot apply for a NAGPRA grant to do the federal agency's job. There are a few exceptions to this, very, very few. If the museum has possession or control of a collection that is largely its own collection, but perhaps a small piece of which is under federal possession or control, then there is an advantage to doing consultation on the entire collection at one time. A museum might apply for a NAGPRA grant to do consultation on the entire collection, most of which is not federal collection, but a small piece of which may be. That would be acceptable. There might be some description in the grant application about how the federal agency has met its obligations or how the federal agency may be participating in the consultation without incurring any costs attributed to the grant. The hard line here is that NAGPRA grants cannot be used to pay for federal obligations. That's the fine point on it. So where an application makes a strong argument for why a grant is needed, it would need to explain why it doesn't cross that line into what the federal agency is obliged to pay for itself. I will say there's an exception to that, and that would be actually through repatriation grants that tribes apply for. There may be ways that a tribe applying for a repatriation grant to repatriate a federal collection could demonstrate that the federal government has completed its obligation and the tribe needs the repatriation grant to physically transfer the collection. That is also the other exception.
Okay, thank you. Let's see the next question. And I'm wondering, Shayla, if you're able to answer this in written form, and if not, then I will pass this on to Melanie. I believe Melanie's going to have the majority of answers on the grants. If they returned our ancestors but didn't utilize the repatriation grant, are we able to apply after the fact to complete the repatriation, like costs of reburial and travel? And so I will see if Shayla can get an answer started, and if not, we can come back to that one and have Melanie help us.
I was going to answer live, if that's okay.
Great, please.
Okay, so I know that with the repatriation grant, you can cover costs associated with travels, transportations, or any ceremonial materials. I don't know. I might have to defer to Melanie for the last part about reburials, if that's okay, Melanie.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can definitely work with you to understand the specifics here in terms of where you are in the process. But provided that a notice has been published and that repatriation statement or previously a transfer of control letter was issued, then if the tribe is incurring costs, we can support those costs through a repatriation grant. What becomes difficult is when you incurred the costs. So for example, if you did a repatriation 10 years ago and paid for a reburial and paid for ceremonial items, we can't reimburse you today for that cost that you incurred 10 years ago. But if you have ancestors and items that need to be reburied now, we can work with you to develop the repatriation grant to cover those costs of reburial and travel. Reburial, the only caveat is we can't support purchasing of land for reburial, but other costs for reburial and excavation or finding a location, we can assist with some of those costs.
Okay, let's see. The next question up is, we have been consulting on a museum-like collection, has received federal funds. They have put out policy guidelines that include they will have the final determination of what will be loaned that has to do with the objects that tribes feel are important and even sacred. How do we demand they not loan or make available for research study? And Audrey, I'll let you take this one if you'd like.
Yeah, let me just read it again because I'm trying to understand exactly the question. So we have been consulting on a museum-like collection, has received federal funds. They have put out a policy guidelines that include they will have the final determination of what will be loaned. Right, okay. So every museum has those duty of care requirements for anything that is in their possession or control or their custody. They are required to consult with any lineal descendants, Indian tribes, or NHO on care, access, etc. if these objects are cultural items. And again, they must include Native American traditional knowledge in this assessment when that knowledge is available. That being said, if there is a request for repatriation, the museum does have the option to state that either they have a right of possession or the request does not meet the definitions that are required to make something eligible for repatriation because it is a cultural item. So if you have shared with them that these objects are cultural items and they are still not abiding by duty of care requirements, I would encourage you to reach out to the National NAGPRA program at nagpra_info@nps.gov, and that's something that we could help you more with. Would you add anything, Kate or Melanie?
I might just add, and then I can let Melanie if she wants to, that we, and this is where for cultural items, a museum may not have identified all of the cultural items. They have some that perhaps that they have identified in their summary, but it sounds like in this case, perhaps not, but a tribe has identified additional items in that collection that actually do, that are considered sacred, but the museum did not have them listed in that way. And so in that case, this is where consultation can then say, you know, where that tribe says, no, these are sacred, and we would like to determine what happens with them under duty of care. Okay, I will move on. Trying to find the next one up. Let's see. Okay. The next one up is any experience or insights on repatriation and access for lineal descendants on a military base. Melanie, I will turn this over to you.
Unfortunately, that my answer here is no. We don't have any experience, certainly, and insights are rather limited here because so much is going to depend on the military installation itself and their land use and accessibility issues. NAGPRA doesn't really provide for any access to a location. Rather, NAGPRA is about the repatriation or disposition of anything that is removed from federal lands, including military installations. So NAGPRA is not going to really address this question, unfortunately. And I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for you, but I see we've got some suggestions, absolutely working with tribal liaisons from the Department of Defense in the military installation should be able to assist you with that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, the next question that's been pushed up is, if a tribe has documented information that confirms a museum has possession or control of a collection that falls under NAGPRA and needs to be consulted on, but that institution has not yet reported anything to National NAGPRA, what resources, routes exist for tribes to push for compliance? Are there any examples of this happening that has led to successful repatriation? Audrey, would you like to answer this one?
Sure. So if this inventory has not been reported to National NAGPRA, and I assume this also means that an itemized list has not been sent to tribes, and an itemized list of consultation has not been initiated whatsoever, but a tribe is aware that this collection exists. According to the 2024 regulation updates, if a museum becomes aware of a collection. I shouldn't necessarily say a new collection, although it may be a new collection to them. They are on a 2-year deadline. So I would say the first thing is for the tribe to approach that museum and let them know of their obligations under NAGPRA. I would also encourage the tribe to reach out to National NAGPRA for assistance. And ultimately, if the museum is not complying with NAGPRA, and say it's something very obvious, like they have not met required deadlines, that's something that you could submit an allegation to the National NAGPRA program about. What would you add, Kate?
I wouldn't add anything to that. All right. Next question, Shayla, I'm not sure if you'd like to answer this live or type if you have the answer. Shayla would like to, okay, great. If we have more than one repatriation at a time, do we put it all on one grant or individually?
I can answer this live. So I believe when applying for the NAGPRA grant, you can have multiple repatriation, or if there's multiple repatriations at the same time, you can submit separate applications for each project. So but there's really no limit to how many applications you can submit within a single year. So you can submit separately. So I don't know if that's right, Melanie, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the main key is the overall cap on the funding for a repatriation grant. So as long as you can fit multiple projects into that under that cap of funding, you are welcome to submit multiple repatriation projects in one grant application. Or as Shayla answered, if you want to separate them out, you can do that. We have had some examples where one repatriation involved so many different tribes and collections from so many different locations across the country that actually had to apply for multiple grants to be able to facilitate all those different pieces of the repatriation. So that's another option. As Shayla said, there's no limit to how many repatriation grants you can apply for. Great job, Shayla.
Thank you. Let's see. We have one question that's still open that Tanner just answered in written form. We don't have any more open questions. Does anyone have additional questions they'd like to put in the Q&A? And while I'll wait a couple of minutes to see if we get any more questions, I'll just remind everybody that next year's webinars will be on a new platform, and we will be sending out information on those upcoming webinar topics, along with information on the new platform. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Oh, thank you all. Thank you all today. Yes, thank you so much to our fellows for presenting the webinar today. We look forward to seeing you all next year. But in the meantime, please continue to send us information to the info box.
And I just want to echo the thanks that you all are getting. I hope you all can see the reactions that you're getting of claps and hearts and celebrations. You guys did a wonderful job. I'm really so pleased that you brought together these 3 presentations to share with this group. And I am so thankful myself for having you all present today instead of me. This is it's a goal of this fellowship to get you guys to this place. And I'm so proud of you, each of you, for what you've presented today. And thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. And let's see, Audrey, can you end the webinar, please? Or Melanie, can you end the webinar?